Morning, dear students. In the last class, we have learned about the body defense mechanism. Right? We learned that our body has got our own defense mechanism to fight against the invading germs, the invading pathogens, the microorganisms. Right? So we have learned about the local defense system that will try to prevent the entry of those harmful pathogens, harmful germs into our body. We have learned about the skin, which acts as a physical barrier for the entry of germs within our body fluid or the body tissues, then the presence of hairs in the nostrils, right? And we have learned range of hair from the windpipe. We have learned the things that they will try to prevent the entry of those harmful germs within our body. But in spite of the presence of those barriers in our body, those local defense system in our body, there are certain germs, there are certain viruses, bacteria or microorganisms which can enter within our body tissues or within our body fluids. Clear? So when those germs enters within our body tissues, our body fluids, then our second type of defense mechanism needs to come into action. Now what is that particular system that will come into action when those pathogens, when those germs will simply cross the local defense system? Yeah, simply it's the immune system. So now we are going to learn about the immune system that will come into action when those harmful germs, harmful pathogens will simply cross the local defense system, the local barrier systems. Here that our immune systems will come to action against those invading germs. So what is immune system? Now, immune system, it generally provides immunity in our body against those invading microorganisms or invading pathogens. So what is immunity? So let's see the definition of immunity and kindly note it down. Clear? So immunity means is the capacity of our body to deal with foreign substances like bacteria, viruses, toxins that enter our body or render them harmless. Now we'll discuss what does foreign substances means. Foreign substances means bacteria, viruses, toxins which are not present in our body but they will enter our body from the surrounding environment. Now since they are not present in our body, they enter our body from the external environment, so they are known as foreign substances. Clear? Now what does toxins means? Toxins means poisons. Once this bacteria, viruses or any harmful germs enters our body, they will start producing the harmful poisons, and those harmful poisons are simply known as toxins. Clear? And our body immunity will try to neutralize the harmful effect of toxins by producing antitoxins. Alright, they will produce antitoxins. Anti means against. So antitoxins will be produced against the harmful toxins produced by these microorganisms. Or we can say that immunity provides resistance against disease-causing germs. So our body immunity must be strong so that we can remain away from the harmful diseases which are caused by the harmful microorganisms or by the harmful pathogens like viruses, bacteria. Clear? So our immunity must be very, very strong, and we have to keep our immunity always high. Clear? So now we look at the kinds of immunity. Okay, what are the different types of immunity? Because we have learned that immunity will help us to remain free from the harmful effect of germs, will keep us free from diseases. But what are the different types of immunity? What are the different kinds of immunity? Now over here, we will not go in detail like how this particular immunity will come into action, alright, what are the particular roles, but we will simply see the type of immunity, alright, then we will discuss what is immunity and how does they provide particular immunity to our body. Okay, we'll just simply looking into their respective salient features. We will not go in details. Clear? We'll just simply touch the particular topic on it. Alright? But each and every kind of immunity, you have to make a note. Clear? So simply write it down. So let's begin. the kinds of immunity. So there are two types of immunity. You have to be very careful. Alright, I have taken this from the book so that it will be easier for you to go through it. So there are two types of immunity, innate immunity and the acquired immunity. Now innate immunity is also called inborn immunity or natural immunity. So one more time, innate immunity is also called inborn immunity or natural immunity. That means innate immunity is present in an individual from the time of birth. Clear? Number two, acquired immunity, acquired during lifetime. So after the birth of the individuals, whatever the immunity will be developed after birth, remember, after birth, whatever the immunity will be developed, it is called acquired immunity. Mentioned during lifetime. So from the time of birth till the death of an individual, whatever the immunity will be developed, it is called acquired immunity. Now types of innate immunity. There are two types of innate immunity, non-specific and specific. Non-specific means it will fight with all type of infections. Whatever the type of infection will be there, whatever the type of germs will enter our body, this non-specific innate immunity will come into actions. So for infections in general, clear? But specific means particular. It will work against a particular infection only. So this was in general. It will fight with all the types of infections, all the types of germs. But specific means it will fight with only a particular type of germs only. Clear? For example, polio vaccine. If you only fight with the polio virus. Clear? So it's very, very specific. It will fight with only a particular type of germ. Remember. Acquired immunity, you have two types, active acquired immunity and passive acquired immunity. Now what is active immunity? It is produced by one's own body. When our body will produce the antibody by itself. Clear? When our own body will produce the antibody by itself, it is called active acquired immunity. There are two types, natural and artificial. Now what is natural active immunity and what is artificial active immunity? Active natural means, in natural active immunity, our own body will produce the antibody in response to the invading foreign substances like virus and bacteria. Natural, our own body will produce the antibody in response to the viruses or the bacteria that enters our body. In artificial active immunity, our body will be exposed to microorganisms like in vaccination. We will take the microbes, but the strength of that microbe will be very, very weak. So during vaccinations, we are taking the microbes, we are taking the germs that will cause a particular disease. In response to vaccinations, our body will produce the antibody. So that is called artificial active immunity. So natural, our body will simply produce the antibody in response to the pathogen that enters our body naturally. But in artificials, we are putting in the pathogens by the help of vaccination so that our body can produce the antibody. This is called artificial. Clear? So we'll go in details one by one afterwards. Passively means supplied from the outside sources. In passive immunity, our body is not producing the antibody, but we are taking the antibody which are produced in other animals. Clear? We are taking in the ready-made antibodies, those antibodies which are produced in other animals. Clear? Then from other animals we are taking in those antibodies. So that is called passive acquired immunity. Two types, natural and artificial. In natural one, the antibody from the mother will pass to the fetus, to the placenta. In artificials, we are taking the ready-made antibody produced in other animals, like in case of snake bite. We take the antivenom, and those antivenoms are produced in other animals. And simply we are taking those antivenom which are produced in other animals. So this is called artificial. So now we will go through it one by one. Okay. So can I bring that note also? So what is innate immunity? It is also called inborn immunity or natural immunity. Remember, innate immunity is also called natural immunity or the inborn immunity, it is present from the time of birth of an organism. From the time of the birth only, inborn immunity or the innate immunity will be there, will be present in a developing fetus. So it is the immunity by virtue of genetic constitutional makeup of an organism. So that means this immunity is mainly dependent on the genetic makeup of an organism, the genetic composition of an organism, the genes. Alright, because when we talk about fertilization, there will be combination of the genes from the maternal side and from the paternal sides. Clear? From the mother and the father sides. And those particular composition of the genes from both the parents will make up the genetic composition of a developing organisms of a child. So this innate immunity is simply dependent on the genetic makeup of an organism. It is present from the time of birth of an individual organism. So from the time of birth only, we will find the innate immunity or the natural immunity. Clear? So from the time of birth only, innate immunity will be there. It will be present in the developing fetus, in developing child. Alright? This is called inborn natural immunity also. Next one, the types of innate immunity. There are two types of innate immunity: non-specific innate immunity and specific innate immunity. Clear? There are two types of innate immunity: non-specific innate immunity and specific innate immunity. Now, what is non-specific innate immunity? It provides natural resistance to all the infection in general. Non-specific immunity is not particular. It provides immunity against all the type of foreign substances, all the types of infections in general. So there is no such discrimination, there is no such specificity in case of selections of the infections or the pathogens. So non-specific innate immunity, it provides immunity against all the type of infections in general. But when the immunity will be provided against a specific infection or specific pathogen, then it will be known as specific innate immunity. It is very, very particular. It will work against a particular infection only. Non-specific was in general. But this specific innate immunity is very, very specific. It works against a particular infection only. Look over here. So it provides resistance to a particular kind of germ only. Here it does not work against all types of germs, like in case of non-specific. But specific innate immunity, it simply works against a particular kind of germ only. For example, in case of human beings are not affected by a disease, distemper, which is mainly one of the most fatal disease in case of dogs. Clear? So human beings are mainly protected from the disease in dogs known as distemper. So this is one of the reasons due to the presence of specific innate immunity. Now, number 2, we talk about the acquired immunity. We have finished about inborn, natural, or innate immunity. There are two types: specific and non-specific. Now we have the second type of immunity. The second kind of immunity is called the acquired immunity. That means after the birth of an individual, during lifetime, whatever the immunity will be developed, it is known as acquired immunity. We are collecting it. Alright, so after the birth, whatever the immunity will be developed in our body, we will call it acquired immunity. So let's see what is acquired immunity. It is the resistance to a disease the body acquires in its lifetime. So, in our lifetime, from the time of birth to the death of an individual, whatever the immunity, whatever resistance will develop against the pathogen, against the germ, that is called acquired immunity. Now, it can be achieved by individuals due to a previous infection or by supplying ready-made antibodies from the outside. So, how can this acquired immunity can be developed? It can be developed due to a natural infection, when the pathogens from the environment will enter our body, maybe for the first time or for the second time. Here, previous infection means when the same pathogen enter our body for the second time. In that case also, acquired immunity will come into action. Or it can be developed by introducing a pathogen in our body from the outside. For example, during vaccination. So in both cases, the acquired immunity will be developed, it will come into action. So this will be developed in our body from the time of birth to the death of an organism. So throughout the lifetime, acquired immunity, whatever the immunity will be developed in our body, whatever resistance will develop against the germ or the pathogen is called acquired immunity. So what are the different types of acquired immunity? There are two types of acquired immunity. The first one is actively acquired immunity and the second one is passively acquired immunity. Okay, so there are two types of acquired immunity. Actively acquired immunity, or we simply say active immunity, and number two is passively acquired immunity. Alright, so active acquired immunity is also two types: naturally actively acquired immunity and artificially acquired active immunity. Clear? Similarly, passively acquired immunity are also two types: naturally passively acquired immunity and artificially acquired passive immunity. So when we talk about active and passive acquired immunity, both are two types. Both are two types: natural and artificial. Keep in your mind. Clear? So both are two types: natural and artificial. So let's see what is actively acquired immunity. Actively acquired immunity is the resistance developed by an individual due to previous infection or due to an antigen which enters the body naturally or by artificial means through vaccination. So what we are trying to say that in actively acquired immunity, our own body will produce the resistance, will develop the immunity. Alright, it will produce the antibody against the pathogen or against the antigen. Yeah. Now, in this case, what happens is that whenever our body will be exposed to the harmful germs like viruses, bacteria, I'm talking about naturally. Alright, when from the environmental conditions, when those harmful germs will enter our body, then our own body will produce the antibodies. Clear? Or those antibodies can also be developed in an artificial means within our body. How? By the means of vaccination. Because I have told you that during vaccination, we are taking in the microbes which are very, very weak in strength. They have got very, very weak strength. So during vaccination, we are taking in the microbes, we are taking the harmful pathogens with very, very weak strength. And when we are taking those microbes with the weak strength during vaccination, our body will produce the antibody against those microbes which are taken through vaccination. Clear? So in both the ways, either natural way or in the artificial way, our own body is developing the antibody. And this type of immunity is called the actively acquired immunity, where our own body is coming into action. It's coming into action by producing the antibody. So it's also two types, natural and artificial. Clear? So we will see the natural actively acquired immunity and the artificial actively acquired immunity. So what is natural? Natural acquired immunity is the resistance developed by an individual due to the presence of antigen in the body fluid that enters naturally. Meaning is that whenever any pathogens, any germs, if they will cross the local defense system, then they will enter our body fluid or the body tissues. Clear? So when the antigens, when the pathogens or the harmful germs are present in the body tissue or in the body fluids, when they enter naturally, then our body will produce the antibody. They will develop resistance to those antigens, to those germs. So such type of resistance which is developed, such type of immunity which is developed is known as naturally acquired active immunity. And artificial ones, it is the resistance developed by individuals when the antigen is introduced by means of artificial ways. Examples by vaccination. Over here in natural acquired immunity, the antigens, the pathogens was entering naturally introduced in our body. We are not being exposed to the pathogen, to the antigen, but those antigens which were present in the environment, they were entering our body naturally. But in artificially acquired active immunity, our body is being exposed to the antigen, to the pathogen. Clear? We are taking in those pathogens by means of vaccination. Over here, the pathogens, the antigens, all the germs are not being introduced or are not being able to enter in our body naturally. But over here, those pathogens are introduced in an artificial way. We are simply just taking it. We know that we are going to encounter, we are going to take a harmful pathogen. Alright? But in vaccination, what we do, simply the strength, the power of those microbes will be very, very weak. Clear? They are just simply able to trigger the immune response. They are not able to produce the symptoms of the disease, but they are simply able to trigger the immune response in our body. So during vaccinations, we are being exposed to the pathogen, to the antigen. Clear? By means of artificial way. So that our body will develop the antibody. So those particular process where we are able to develop the resistance, we are able to develop the immunity when the antigen is introduced in an artificial way. It is called artificially acquired active immunity. So there are two types of actively acquired immunity, natural and artificial. In natural, the pathogens will simply enter our body in a natural way. But in artificial way, we are taking in the pathogens, we are taking in the antigens, we are taking in the harmful germs that will create a particular disease, that will cause a particular disease. Clear? An example is during vaccination. For example, like we took up a polio vaccine. Now in polio vaccine, we are simply taking the microbes, the virus that causes polio. We are doing vaccinations, we are not taking the medicines that will fight against the polio. But during polio vaccinations, we are taking the microbe, we are taking the virus that will cause the polio. But the strength of that polio virus will be very, very weak. Alright, it will not be able to produce the disease polio in individuals. But it is simply able to trigger the immune response. It will produce the antibody in an organism. Clear? So those who are taking the polio vaccinations, that individual will develop the immunity against polio disease. Clear? Next one. Antigen. Because we are saying that what is antigens? Antigens can be introduced in our body naturally or artificially by vaccination. But what is antigen? Antigens are the chemicals found on the surface of the disease-causing germ cells. So whatever the germ cells means, those microbes, those viruses, those bacteria, they are usually called the antigens because they will produce the chemicals which are called the antigens. So these antigens are the chemicals which are produced by the invading foreign substances, and these antigens, in response to the antigens in our body will produce the antibody. Clear? In response to antigen, our body will produce the antibody. So this antibody must be specific, and this antibody will always work against the antigens or a substance that enters the body and start a process that can cause disease. So whenever the antigens enters our body, then those antigens can cause harmful disease in the organism. And in response to the antigens that enters our body will produce the antibody. Anti means against. Remember, anti means what? The word anti means against, and body means not our own body. What is against the foreign substances, or we can say antigens. Okay, so anti means against, and body means against the foreign substances like viruses, bacteria, or against the antigens. So whenever the antigens are introduced into our body in a natural way or in an artificial way, our body will produce the antibody. Clear? So can we note it down? So afterwards in next class we'll talk about antibody in detail. Clear? Just remember right now that antibodies are produced in our body in response to the antigens. And whenever the antigens enter our body, it can cause harmful diseases. Clear? Now, role of lymphocytes in active immunity. Now, what is lymphocytes? It's mainly a WBC, white blood cells. Clear? There are two types of WBC, T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. So we will not go into the type of lymphocytes, but simply remember lymphocytes are a type of WBC and it plays an important role in providing body immunity. Clear? So now let us see the role of lymphocytes. Clear? How does it will help in providing immunity or resistance to a disease? Role of lymphocytes. Mainly lymphocytes help us in providing natural active immunity. How? Look by one. Natural active immunity. Natural means whenever the antigens will enter our body in a natural way from the surrounding environmental conditions. So in that case, it will come into actions. Now, how does the lymphocyte will come into actions? Produces antibody. So what is anti means? Anti means against, body means against the pathogens, against the antigens, which bind to the microorganism to kill them or to kill it. That means lymphocytes will produce the antibody. That antibody will go and just bind with the antigens and will kill the germs. Clear? And number two, lymphocytes will produce the killer cells, KILLER, killer cells that carries receptor for the foreign antigens found on the invading germs. So killer cells will also go and bind with the antigens and will destroy the antigens. So lymphocytes will produce antibody and will produce the killer cells. Clear? And it provides immunity against the invading foreign antigens or the harmful microorganisms. Clear? Now, over here, this is very, very important. Okay? Between active and passive immunity, which one is long lasting? The actively acquired immunities are usually long lasting. Why? Why does the actively acquired immunities are long lasting? Because in actively acquired immunity, our body will not only produce the antibodies, listen carefully, in naturally or in actively acquired immunity, our body will not only produce the antibody, but at the same time, it will also produce memory cells. This is very, very important. Okay, our body also produce memory cells. Look over here. The actively acquired immunities are usually long lasting, carried out through the memory lymphocytes. So memory cells will be produced. Now what is the function of memory cells? Now for this one, let us go into the artificial way, that is vaccination. We learn that during vaccination, we are introducing the weak pathogens or the microorganisms in our body that can cause harmful diseases, right? For example, let's say during polio vaccination. During polio vaccinations, we are taking in the polio virus that can cause the polio, right? During vaccination, we are not taking the medicines. We are simply taking in the microbes, but the strength of that microbe will be very, very weak. Clear? So when we are going for vaccination, we are taking the microbe, the strength of those microbe or the pathogens is very, very weak. Now what happens during vaccination? During vaccinations, our body will produce antibody. Antibody will work against those antigens, those microorganisms. Clear? But at the same time, it will produce the memory cells. Clear? Now what is the function of memory cells? Suppose for the second time, if the same pathogen, the same antigen has entered our body, then this memory cell will recognize those invading foreign substances. These memory cells will recognize those invading microorganisms, whether they have entered our body for the first time or the second time. Now, if those microorganisms are entering our body for the second time, then in that case, there is no need to produce the antibody. Alright, in that case, these memory cells will simply produce the antibody by itself. There is no need to take the antibody. Alright, our memory cells will recognize the microorganisms, and these memory cells will simply produce the antibody by itself. This is the basic principle of vaccination. The main principle of vaccination is the formation of memory cells, and whenever there will be formation of memory cells, our body will be immune to the harmful diseases. Clear? So, actively acquired immunities are long lasting, because actively acquired immunity there will be formation of memory cells, and these memory cells will recognize whether the pathogens, whether the microorganisms has entered our body for the first time or they're entering our body for the second time. Alright, to recognize those microorganisms, those invading antigens, and they will produce the antibody against those invading foreign pathogens or antigens. So actively acquired immunity are very important, because in this case our own bodies are coming into action. Here it's forming the antibody and it's forming the memory cell by itself. So between active and passive, active immunity is long lasting. Okay, now we'll talk about the passively acquired immunity. We have finished about the actively acquired immunity. Now what is passively acquired immunity? It is the immunity provided to an individual not by its own body, but from an outside source in the form of a ready-made antibody. That means in passively acquired immunity, our own body is not producing the antibody. Clear? One more listen carefully. In passively acquired immunity, our own body is not producing the antibody, but in this case, we are getting the antibody which are being produced in other animals. We are taking the antibody produced from other sources. That means the ready-made antibody are being taken in case of passively acquired immunity. In case of actively acquired immunity, our own body was producing the antibody and the memory cells. That's why it was a long-lasting immunity. It develops long-lasting immunity. But in passively acquired immunity, what we have learned, in this case, our own body, they are not producing the antibody, but in this case, we are taking the antibody which are produced from other sources, they are produced in other animals. There are two types, natural and artificial. So let's see what is naturally passively acquired immunity and artificially acquired passively immunity, naturally acquired immunity. In this case, the ready-made or the pre-prepared antibodies from the mother reach the fetus through the placenta. So naturally acquired immunity. In this case, the antibody will be transported from the mother to the developing fetus or the developing embryo through the placenta. That means from the time of development of an organism within the uterus, alright? That means from the time of embryonic development, from the time of development of embryo, development of fetus, the immunity will be provided by the mother. The antibody from the mother will be transferred to the developing fetus. So this is called naturally acquired passive immunity, where the antibody is being supplied by the mother, is being transported by the mother to the developing fetus by the help of placenta. So through the placenta, those antibody from the mother will be transported to the developing fetus. So the fetus is getting the antibody, is getting the immunity from the mother's body, and such type of immunity is called naturally acquired passive immunity. Clear? Now, what is artificially acquired passive immunity? In this case, the immunity is developed by injecting or introducing antibody which are prepared in other animals. So in this case, so in artificially one, the immunity is developed in an artificial way. How? By simply injecting or by introducing the antibody in our body which are produced from other animals, which are produced in other sources. Our body is not producing the antibody, but those antibody are produced from other sources, are produced in other animals, and we are simply injecting it or we are taking it. And such type of immunity which are developed by taking those antibody developed in other animals or developed from other sources, then such type of immunity is called artificially acquired passive immunity. For example, simple. We used to take anti-venin or anti-venom. In what type of situation we should take anti-venom? Simply whenever an individual is usually have a snake bite, alright, during snake bite, what we do usually, we used to take anti-venom. In this case, we don't wait for our own body to produce the antibody against this venom during snake bite. But what we do during snake bite, we simply take the anti-venom which are produced in other animals, simply in case of horse. Alright, in case of from the horse mainly we used to develop the anti-venom. So during snake bite, we used to take the anti-venom, and that anti-venom is produced in other animals. Our body is not developing the anti-venom, but those anti-venom are developed in other animals like horse. And from those animals we will collect the anti-venom and we will take it in case of snake bite. So this is the example of artificially acquired passive immunity. In this case, the immunity is not developed in our body, but it is being injected in our body, which is being prepared from other animals. Clear? Okay. Now, next one. Difference between active and passive immunity. So let's see the difference between these two. Active immunity produced by one's own body. Okay, so active immunity, those type of immunity where our own body will come into action. Passive immunity received from outside that is not developed by one's own body. So this is we have gone through it. When passive immunity, our body will not produce the antibody, but will take the antibody which are produced from other animals. Number 2, induced by infection or by contact with immunogens means antigens. That means inactive immunity is mainly being activated in our body when we will come in contact with the antigens in a natural way or in an artificial way by means of vaccination. So it will come into action. Passive immunity is provided by ready-made antibody. In passive immunity, our body is not developing the antibody. We are simply taking the ready-made antibody like anti-venom against snake bite. Clear? So in passive immunity, we are simply taking in the ready-made antibody which are produced in other animals. Number 3, provides effective and long-lasting protection. So active immunity, it provides effective and long-lasting protection while it develops memory cells. Passive immunity protection is less effective and temporary. It does not ensure protection against subsequent infection. This passive immunity provides immunity just for a short period of time only and is less effective, okay, and temporary. But this is long-lasting and very effective with the formation of memory cells. Immunity effective only after a certain time gap, time required for production of antibody. Clear? Why? Because once our body will be exposed to the antigens naturally or artificially, immediately there will be no formation of antibody. It will take a short period of time, and within that period of time there will be formation of antibody. So a small gap will be there. Okay, and this particular gap will be there mainly till there will be formation of antibody. But over here, in passive immunity, we are taking in the ready-made antibody, so it will be immediately effective. Why it is effective? Because we are just simply taking the ready-made antibody. But over here, this immunity is effective only after a certain time gap. It is not effective immediately. Why? Because a certain time is required for the formation of antibody in case of active immunity. So a certain time, a certain period of gap is over here, so that there will be formation of antibody against the antigens. But here it is effective immediately because we are simply taking the ready-made antibody. Clear? So simply go through it. Alright. So what we have done today, we have learned about today the immune system. We have learned about what is immunity and the kinds of immunity. Clear? So kindly go through it. We make a note. Alright. So we will meet in next